Hello, everybody. Welcome in. It's time to set the stage for 49ers and Vikings. This is the fun one as far as Kyle Shanahan and quarterback history is concerned because Kirk Cousins, his name comes back up. And I don't think that a lot of people look forward to that, but it's been a part of the 49ers discourse here for a really, really long time, and rightfully so, because Kyle Shanahan has been tied to Kirk Cousins. But the good news for many 49ers fans who probably are sick and tired of hearing that name linked to the 49ers, the good news is that Brock Purdy is really silencing that Kirk Cousins talk. Kirk is scheduled to be a free agent after this season, but first he's going to play against the 49ers as the quarterback of the Minnesota Vikings. He's number 2 in the entire NFL behind only Tua Tagovailoa in passing yardage this year. But this is also a great lesson, a great example of passing yardage isn't that important. You could be number 2 in passing yardage, but you're not the second best quarterback in the league. There are other smarter metrics to look at things, and Brock Purdy actually is better than the Vikings' Kirk Cousins in those metrics. So let's set the stage for Purdy against Cousins, 49ers against the Vikings. I think that you probably would like to see the metrics first. Well, when I say that passing yardage doesn't matter, it's because I'm looking at something like this. An advanced stat chart is not going to include passing yardage because you could have garbage yardage there. A 10-yard gain on 3rd and 15 is not as valuable as an 8-yard gain on 3rd and 6. So for that, we go to expected points added per play, which is going to factor in the down and distance. And we see that Brock Purdy highlighted here, top of the league in expected points per play. Kirk Cousins, despite the fact that he is number 2 in passing yardage, way down at number 15. Tua Tagovailoa, who's number 1 in passing yardage, he's right here, number 2 in EPA per play. So Brock Purdy's been significantly more efficient than Kirk Cousins within the context of what he's doing in that 49ers system versus Kirk Cousins within the context of Minnesota's system. If you want to see what Mike prepared, I think this is funny. It's Kyle Shanahan as Palpatine. One of the lightsabers from Kirk Cousins, one of the lightsabers from Brock Purdy. Funny stuff. We're going to have to return to that. Nice job from Mike. Here is the visualization on an XY chart for the EPA per play. Vertical axis means better efficiency. Look where Brock Purdy is. That's really good. Now, accuracy, completion percentage over expectation is going to be x-axis, left and right. So Purdy's in that upper right quadrant where you want to be. Meanwhile, Kirk Cousins is right near the origin of the graph. I'm circling his dot with the mouse, the cursor, I guess I should say. It's not great for Kirk Cousins. It's relatively average for Kirk Cousins. Actually, by Jimmy Garoppolo right now. I think Kirk Cousins is this one just to the right. So near the origin, Jimmy Garoppolo a little bit further to the left. Garoppolo's actually been more efficient, but less accurate according to CPOE. Kirk Cousins has been a little bit more accurate, but less efficient right here along the diagonal line. So right now, Brock Purdy is outperforming Kirk Cousins. And, I mentioned Jimmy Garoppolo too, because we're going to talk about him and his history. For those of you who might be new to the show, new to the last few years of the 49ers, even those of you who know the story, we can kind of go through the anthology of Shanahan and Cousins. In 2012, the Shanahans, that's Mike Shanahan, the head coach, and Kyle Shanahan, the offensive coordinator, were in charge of Washington. And Washington in the 4th round drafted Kirk Cousins. That was after Andrew Luck and Robert Griffin went in that 2012 draft. Robert Griffin obviously went to Washington. He was their starting quarterback to begin. Really good year in 2012, rookie of the year for Robert Griffin. But injuries started to become a problem for RG3. And in that first season, 2012, and in 2013, Kirk Cousins saw some playing time under Mike and Kyle Shanahan. After 2013, both Mike and Kyle Shanahan were gone from Washington. Regime change in Washington. Cousins stayed there. Cousins ultimately became the starting quarterback for Washington. Kyle Shanahan went to Cleveland in 2014, had a season there. Johnny Manziel was on the team. Then Kyle Shanahan went to Atlanta 2015 and 2016 when Matt Ryan was his quarterback. In 2017, Kyle Shanahan took over the 49ers as head coach. And he remembered coaching Kirk Cousins throughout Kirk's first 2 seasons in the NFL, 2012 and 2013. And Kyle put his eyes on Kirk Cousins. He said, I liked working with this guy. I like what he's become as a quarterback in the few years that I've been elsewhere in Cleveland and in Atlanta. And Kyle said, I want to sign Kirk Cousins to be my franchise quarterback with the 49ers once he becomes available in free agency, because Washington was franchise tagging him. I think they franchise tagged him twice. But the perception around the league was that Kirk Cousins would become available after the 2017 season. So in the second season of Kyle Shanahan being in charge of the 49ers. So what the 49ers did is they signed a placeholder. They didn't look to draft a quarterback in the first round of 2017. They wanted a developmental project, so they waited till the third round. They drafted C.J. Beathard, but they signed Brian Hoyer as a placeholder. He was only supposed to be there for a year until they could sign Kirk Cousins in free agency. That was the initial plan. Shanahan has talked about this. Kirk Cousins, imagine this. Kirk Cousins, 49ers quarterback starting in 2018. How would that have changed all of these fortunes? But then fate came calling, and it came calling right on November 1st of 2017. Late in that season, Jimmy Garoppolo arrived to the 49ers via a trade. Bill Belichick basically picked up the phone from New England and told Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch, you can have Jimmy Garoppolo for a second-round pick. Take it or leave it. And the 49ers took it. Jimmy Garoppolo put on his awesome 5-game stretch to close the 2017 season. That encouraged the 49ers to re-sign Jimmy Garoppolo to what was then a record deal in 2018, spring, March of 2018, and not pursue Kirk Cousins. They chose Jimmy Garoppolo over Kirk Cousins in 2018. So Cousins, who finally was a free agent, Washington declined to exercise yet another franchise tag on him. Would have been really, really pricey at that point. Washington let him walk. Minnesota signed Kirk Cousins as a free agent. And as luck would have it, the 49ers and the Vikings actually played in the season opener of 2018. So it was Garoppolo against Cousins. Dante Pettis scored a touchdown in that game. The Vikings won. Cousins had decent years for the Vikings. I think really solid years, especially in 2019 and 2020 for that football team as far as efficiency goes. And because Cousins was playing well, might have been boring, but he was playing well from 2018 to the present day, especially fueled by the fact that Jimmy Garoppolo suffered an ACL tear in 2018 and then struggled to stay healthy with the 49ers. There has been incessant Kirk Cousins Shanahan talk about, when might a reunion happen? Because Cousins initially signed a 3-year deal with Minnesota that covered 2018, 2019, 2020. Obviously, he has since re-upped with the Vikings, but that renegotiation, that re-signing with the Vikings, that deal runs out after this season. So Cousins set to become a free agent again. It was up until the start of this season. We kept on hearing, Brock Purdy, is this just going to be a 1-year trial for Brock Purdy? Are the 49ers going to go out and try to get Kirk Cousins since he'll be a free agent again? Well, the play from Brock Purdy so far this year, put this back up on the screen, most efficient quarterback in the league, even in his first bad game as an NFL starter, as an NFL quarterback last week at Cleveland. Purdy led what could have been the game-winning drive against the historically good defense so far. His play so far this year has been the silencer of Kirk Cousins talk. But guess what? We can now talk about Kirk Cousins because Kyle Shanahan can watch Kirk Cousins and Brock Purdy battle it out in Minnesota at a cool stadium, like a Death Star construction over there in Minnesota. You got I've heard that it's awesome. I can't wait to see it for the first time. And it might be, I rank the stadiums, and right now I actually have Atlanta as my number one. I put Atlanta over SoFi. I think it's a little bit more accessible. You can take public transit there, which is cool. It's in the middle of Atlanta versus SoFi Stadium, which is, there is no middle of LA. LA is just so spread out and everything. But I really enjoyed the game against the Falcons last year, checking out that stadium. Arthur Blank, the Falcons owner, has made sure to keep concession prices. I think he signed a contract with the vendors to make sure their prices are the same in the stadium as they are at locations outside of the stadium. So I'm a big fan of Atlanta. And in my stadium rankings, I can't wait to include Minnesota's US Bank Stadium in them. And I'll finally be able to after next Monday night. We'll see if Brock Purdy is the silencer of the Vikings and not just the Kirk Cousins talk. Because if he's not, if things slide for Brock Purdy moving forward, then he'll no longer be the silencer of the Kirk Cousins talk. But the 49ers are favored by 6.5 points as Brock Purdy and Kirk Cousins are set to square off. They're not going to be going against each other, right? It's going to be Purdy against the Vikings defense. It's going to be Cousins against the 49ers defense, and a bounce back opportunity for the San Francisco 49ers. All right, we're going to move it to 49ers Q&A. We're going to talk. Oh, by the way, 49,000. Thank you to everybody. 49,000 subscribers plus, like, blew it away by like 300 last night. So 49,000 for a lot of 49ers coverage. You know that I love promoting all of my work up on The Athletic. That's really why I started this channel, is to bring you a lot of my written work about the 49ers. I've been covering this team for 7 seasons now. Speaking of the 49ers coverage on The Athletic, here you go. This is the article that I wrote from Cleveland. I'm going to have one on the 49ers run defense coming out tomorrow morning. So, maybe Mike can toss this link into the description of this piece. I'm going to send it to him right now. And it'd be awesome if you could subscribe to The Athletic through this piece. I think it's probably only $2 a month or something right now. Help support the cause, because I think we've branched out into video coverage. Obviously, Matt Barrows and I do a lot of podcasting work as well. So you can go ahead and check out Here's the Catch. And it's fun to have the entire community aboard for everything that we're doing. And 49,000 is a really, really neat milestone. So thank you to everybody. I am now moving this to the 49ers Q&A. What's up, everybody? How are you doing? Mike wants 50K subs by Monday. That'd be crazy. I mean, you can help me get there. Those of you who are new watching this show right now, go ahead and punch that into the browser, the link that Mike, I think, is going to be tossing into. Yeah, he's adding it in right now. He's going to be tossing it into the description. And I could even post it as a comment right now. There you go. Theathletic.com. Yeah, I think you go to the live chat. But if you're watching this later, go to the description. Do you think the number 1 seed is realistically in play for the 49ers with the Lions having such an easy schedule? You don't know what's easy and what's not until these games are actually played and until you know the health situation of all the teams. We're still early in this marathon. The 49ers are 5-1. The Lions are 5-1. I will say that the next 8 games look like hell for the Eagles, starting with Miami right next. That's going to be really interesting. But the 49ers absolutely have a shot at the 1 seed, because how many teams do you think are going to beat the 49ers, especially if they're relatively healthy week in and week out? It took a whole hell of a lot for a historically good Browns defense to beat the 49ers on Sunday. A lot had to go right for Cleveland. Remember, when you're talking about this Cleveland game, the Cleveland Browns have given up 1,002 yards through 6 games. That is the 3rd fewest yards given up by an NFL defense since 1970. 53 years. So I was talking to my wife's dad today, and he did the math really quickly. He was like, wait, how many NFL teams are there? I told him 32. So he multiplied 32 times 53. I know they're not quite 32 teams all those years, but if you do the rough math, that's like 1,500 to 1,700 teams, maybe a little bit less. I don't know how many teams there were back in 1970, but that's when the AFL-NFL merger was. Just let's play it conservatively and say 1,300, 1,400 teams. The Browns rank number 3 on that list of over 1,000 teams over the past 53 years, as far as fewest yards given up over that time, over the first 6 games. So the 49ers are played a defense that's done historically cool things against them. That had done historically cool things over the first six games, and that's who they're up against this past Sunday in Cleveland. They struggled offensively, but they were still in position to win at the end of the game. They're going to go back to the drawing board, try to fix some things, but I don't think we should discount how good the 49ers opponent was. So if it took the Browns that much to beat the 49ers, I think you could do the math for the rest of the season. It's going to be tough to beat this 49ers team moving forward, and they very much still control their own destiny for the number 1 seed. Lewis Payne says bounce back game. Michael Powers, thank you. He wants the 49ers to bring in La'el Collins for a workout before the Eagles or some other team sign him. I mean, Collins, big-time injury history, especially recently. Is he ready to play? Word gets around the league. I mean, there's a reason why Cincinnati got rid of him, right? So swing tackles aren't necessarily in abundance in the league. In fact, there's a big shortage of them. So just because somebody is a bigger name doesn't necessarily make them a wise signing to take up a roster spot. And I think that these teams probably know a little bit more than we do about these players. But thank you for the comment. I'm sure the 49ers will do their due diligence. Cal Bears says a lot of things went in the Browns' favor, and the 49ers still were close to the win. I think that's exactly the way you look at it. And that's why it's so hard to go undefeated in the NFL, because I said it last week. You're playing with percentages. Even if you have an 80% chance to win every single week, that, compounds when you multiply probability, right? 80% times 80% times 80%. To run the rest of the table, the 49ers would have had like a 4 or 5% chance, even assuming an 80% chance to win every week. And I don't think it's going to be 80% every week. Last week might have only been like 65. Against the Eagles, it's going to be damn near 50-50 on the road. Maybe a slight advantage of the 49ers because I think that the Lions are better than the Eagles. But that's just how things stand right now. Injuries can shift the dynamics here in the NFC. So you just got to keep on playing and playing hard. Brian Burns, if Carolina decides to move on from Brian Burns, I do think that they would want a king's ransom. I don't think the 49ers are in position to try to give up a first-round pick. Now, the only thing about the 49ers potentially being willing to send the first-round pick elsewhere is that if they really think they're going to go to the Super Bowl, and that's going to be the 31 or the 32 overall pick next year, maybe they would be more happy to send it away. But whoever they're trading with will also realize that. The Panthers will be like, wait, we're sending you Brian Burns. That essentially locks up a Super Bowl berth for you. That means that the first round pick that you're sending us is going to be like number 31 or 32. Hold on, you better send us more, right? And the 49ers have a lot of draft capital. Maybe they decide that's worth the rental for half a year if Carolina decides to have that fire sale. But it is asking a lot. And don't discount Randy Gregory. Randy Gregory, over the past 3 years, has been a top 10 pass rushing productivity edge rusher in the NFL. And he had a great debut with the 49ers in Cleveland. That was one of the true bright spots in the game for the 49ers. I think if anything, they might want more depth in the secondary. And of course, more depth along the offensive line, even the interior. They can think about sprucing up the interior because that O-line did struggle against the Browns. Now, it was a historically good defense they were facing, a really good front. I was talking about it all week, so I'm not surprised that they struggled. I see it around the whole NFL. Offensive lines in general are struggling against these defensive lines right now just because of the athleticism difference. So everybody is looking for offensive linemen. Every team, especially a contending team, wants offensive linemen. So I'm not so sure that it's going to be possible to pick up a true upgrade at this point. But if it falls into the 49ers lap, if they can maneuver some kind of shrewd deal, of course they're going to be interested. You also have to think about the opportunity cost, though. If you send picks somewhere for any position, it could hurt you in this coming draft. And if you want to address some of this stuff for the long term in the coming draft where you're stocked with picks right now, you better be stingy with them. You better say, okay, wait, hold on. I'm going to hold on to this pick because I want some ammo when this draft comes around in April of 2024. Yep, Jeremy Chin did get injured, and that was a player that some people were talking about as a potential trade target. I think he's going to be out at least 6 weeks now, so that probably is not going to be anything that comes to fruition. Chin, versatile safety, can play the nickel. That was somebody, maybe you could get him for cheaper now. He's in a contract year, but it wouldn't be available till, again, 2 months from now. It could be somebody that would bolster the 49ers secondary. I think the 49ers are relatively happy with Deommodore Lenoir on the outside. It's 4 picks in his last 9 games. Yeah, he slipped and fell on the Amari Cooper big gainer against the Browns. But I think that they're happy with Lenoir. I think that they're obviously happy with Charvarius Ward. But he does have that foot issue that's appeared on the injury report now a couple of times. And depth is always important. And they have been, I can't tell if they're happy or not at the nickelback spot. They haven't really been exposed in the pass game there overly much. But more and more teams that they face, especially as this season intensifies in difficulty, might try to use the quick change of direction, the smaller receivers, kind of like we saw with Kevontae Turpin and Dallas against Isaiah Oliver in that slot cornerback position. So I just think more depth in the secondary, if the 49ers can get their hands on it, would bolster this football team. Here's a good question. Is the number 12 behind me an Andrew Luck jersey? Yeah, I went to Stanford at the same time as Andrew. He's 2 years younger than me. I'm the same age as Richard Sherman. So Sherman and I were at Stanford together. That is a Luck jersey. I can't tell you who the 17 jersey is. until if and when the 49ers win the Super Bowl. After that, we can flip around the 17 jersey. I think that will be a lot of fun. I showed a stat about Mike McGlinchey playing about as well in pass protection as Colton McKivitz. That was like 3 weeks ago. I could look at the pass rushing productivity right now. That's actually a good question. It's a good thing to keep up to date right now. Let's check this out. Let's see where Mike McGlinchey versus Colton McKivitz are in pass blocking, not pass rushing productivity, in pass blocking productivity. So I go by position. I'm on PFF. Great stuff on PFF. You should absolutely subscribe to them. This is going to be like a little commercial for them at the end of the day once I get this up here. All right, we're going to compare Colton McKivitz and Mike McGlinchey as soon as this loads. And I'm going to sort it by pass blocking efficiency. Penei Sewell, the Detroit tackle, he's number one. I remember he came out the same year as Trey Lance in that draft. All right, where's Colton at? Colton McKivitz in pass blocking efficiency is 44th out of 61 tackles, and Mike McGlinchey is 58th out of 61 tackles. So, yes, I mean, we knew that Mike McGlinchey wasn't a good pass protector. He actually improved over his time with the 49ers to be about average, but he's really struggled with Denver. So I've got McKivitz highlighted here, and definitely check out PFF. It's really good stuff. You could sort by all of this. So I've got McKivitz highlighted here as 44.51. And then I just highlighted Mike McGlinchey way down here. Do you see it? My mouse is hovering over McGlinchey down there. So McGlinchey is near the bottom. And McKivitz obviously is below average, but in terms of pass protection, but at least the 49ers aren't paying him $87.5 million like Denver is paying Mike McGlinchey. So, and I think that McKivitz has gotten better too over time. He only gave up one pressure against the Browns. A lot of pressure came against Trent Williams, but he was hurt. So there's a reason for that. And it's the interior that would concern me a little bit more with Spencer Burford. I mean, if the 49ers can find a guard, last year they had that platoon going with Spencer Burford and Daniel Brunskill that I really think helped Spencer, kept your linemen fresh. Bill Walsh used to platoon offensive linemen back in the 80s. He believed in keeping that side of the ball fresh, kind of like the 49ers run a ton of platoons and a ton of rotations along the defensive line. That's how they wear out opposing offensive lines, because at the end of the game, opposing offensive linemen have played 60 to 70 snaps, where, you know, your Bosas of the world, they're only like 30 to 40, and they're coming in fresh in the fourth quarter. So there's nothing wrong with having more than 5 capable offensive linemen. In fact, that's a luxury that a lot of teams strive to have, and the 49ers did have that last year. They weren't able to keep it because Daniel Brunskill signed for more money with the Tennessee Titans. But if something pops up here at the trade deadline, which I think is unlikely, but if it does, I think the 49ers might be on that market. I did graduate from Stanford, yes. Desmond King released by the Steelers. A former Iowa guy, not a teammate with Kittle, but he played against Stanford and Christian McCaffrey back in the Rose Bowl. I believe King was the Jim Thorpe Award winner that year. Best DB in college football. So, I mean, you could watch the tape of anybody. You could work anybody out, especially a veteran like Desmond King, who was just released. But I would remind you that there was a reason why the Steelers released him. So, again, you look into it. You see if he's good enough now, obviously at a more advanced age than in his prime. You see if he's good enough now to help your football team. And if there's a possibility, yeah, sure, maybe you could bring him in on the practice squad. If there's not, then you move on to somebody else. But this league is tough, you know, especially on older players that have been around for a while. There's constantly new talent coming in, fresher, newer talent. And it's just a situation where that newer talent's probably going to get a little bit of a precedent, right? Unless that veteran player is a star. And in that case, the team might take a flyer on the star, but we'll see what the 49ers do. Hearing more defensive player of the year rumblings for Fred Warner. That is cool to hear. I mean, Tashawn Gibson described Fred Warner the best that he hits like a linebacker, he covers like a safety, and he pass rushes like a defensive end, like a D lineman. He said that this guy was essentially built in a lab to play linebacker. That's kind of cool stuff, you know. And Tashawn Gibson's been around for a while. He's 33 years old, 33 interceptions. He's the kind of guy that you listen to. When he talks, you listen. Back when Richard Sherman was with the 49ers, when he talked, I listened. Right? Back at Stanford, when I talked to Richard Sherman, when he talked, I listened. I learned a lot about football being around people like that. Tashawn Gibson is a library. He's an encyclopedia about the game. Really, really smart player. Cal Bear says, interesting that there has been no more talk about the Gibson hit. I thought that was not a great call, but when you leave your feet, there's a good chance the flag is coming. I mean, if when you play defense in the NFL, there's a good chance a flag is coming. The key is, you know, it could be a bad call in a vacuum, sure, and we can sit here and listen to people complain about it all day. My thing is, you just have to beat an opponent badly enough to where a call like that doesn't hurt you if it goes against you. And the 49ers were either leading the league in point differential or number two. They're at the very top. They're very near the top in point differential. That shows they're winning games by a lot. They're winning games by multiple possessions heading into Cleveland. They weren't leaving anything to chance. So there might have been a bad call against the Cowboys. There might have been a bad call at some point against the New York Giants. There might have been a bad call at some point against the Arizona Cardinals, but you don't remember it because the 49ers won by 2, 3, 4 possessions in those games. 5 in the case of the Cowboys. Well, the Cowboys could have scored 4 touchdowns and 4 2-point conversions and tied the game and forced overtime. But I think that'd be a 100% success rate, and they weren't close to having a 10% success rate that night. My point is that these games weren't close, so one call was not game altering. But when you play a close game, when you make enough mistakes to allow the Browns to hang around, then one call can be game altering. So you just got to beat the brakes off of these teams, and then it won't matter. You got to go win by a possession plus, and it won't matter. And that's what you have to do, I think, in the modern NFL. It's really tough. You know what team would have really, really struggled with the way that the rules have changed? And I think it was part of the reason why this team started to hit its decline was the Jim Harbaugh 49ers. They were the last great thumpers in the NFL, well, along with the Legion of Boom. I mean, that was kind of the era where these thumping defenses started to get phased out because the rules were changing so drastically in the favor of the offense. But Dante Whitner, remember when he was trying to change his name to Dante Hittner? I don't think he ever officially did that. But anyway, you had Dante Whitner, you had Deshaun Goldson. 49ers hit hard, and a lot of those hits would be no-brainer penalties now for NFL officials. I'm not saying they would have been good calls, but that's just the way the NFL is calling the game. And I mean, the Seattle Seahawks hit hard too. Defenses like that, I mean, it's different now. Now you have to root your defense in the pass rush. And I know Seattle and the 49ers had a great pass rush then too, but a big part of their defensive MO were the big hits over the middle, the safeties right over the middle. Cam Chancellor, Earl Thomas with the Seattle Seahawks. Now, because of the legislation on the back end, obviously there's also legislation with how you hit the quarterback, but there's a way to technique your way around that, hitting the quarterback. Make sure you don't land on him with your full weight. And I think that's a big reason why in 2017, Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch decided to build this defense from the line up. They weren't saying second coverage over rush. They were saying rush over coverage, symbiotic relationship, because they felt they could keep this defense a little bit more sustainable within the rules. Obviously, the John Gibson penalty burned the 49ers the other day, but one play does not change the larger strategy that the 49ers have undertaken. Of course, the 49ers have a concern at the kicker position. They would have a concern, though, even if Robbie Gould was their kicker. Wrong side of 40. I mean, it was a concern with Robbie Gould. Wrong side of 40. The kickoffs weren't where you wanted them to be. You didn't know when he would start to decline with some of the clutch field goals because his percentage as a whole declined last year. I mean, Robbie Gould also missed a 41-yarder last year to win the game against the Raiders. So, yeah, you took a risk. I think you reassigned risk. You went from the older kicker to the younger kicker to the rookie, but he was rock solid in college. And I think, you absolutely built into your thinking over the big picture that Moody might have some struggles. If you look at the diagrams of the kick and the wind, it pushed it like 2.25 yards to the right. He missed that because of the wind. The wind at Cleveland Stadium is famously, or maybe I should say infamously, hard to gauge from the field because it's different up at kick level than it is on field level. And somebody like Robbie Gould has had his whole career kicking in different stadiums. Somebody like Jake Moody obviously is doing this for the first time in Cleveland. So the next time he goes to Cleveland, it's going to look a lot better. For the 49ers sake, I think there's really good news. Where are you going to go on the road in the playoffs if you don't get the number 1 seed? Well, you could go to Detroit, right? Okay, that's an indoor stadium. He's not going to have to know the wind there. You go to Philadelphia, but they play there in December, so he's going to get a gauge on the wind there. This guy's going to probably get better over time. Just like a rookie quarterback will miss a pass or two or a few early in his NFL career, he's going to get better and at minimizing the misses as time goes along. So kicking is a science, and you have to let this play out over the longer term. Moody's 9 of 11. That's not a terrible percentage. Unfortunately, he's 0 for 1 on regular season game winners. But guess what? He also started the preseason with 2 misses against the Raiders, and then he course corrected after that. So give the guy a chance to course correct, because people watching this, I could speak for myself, but I'm probably speaking for everybody watching this show right now. If you honestly looked at yourself, I'm sure there's something in your life that's a big part of your life that you weren't nearly as good at when you first did it, right? And kicking at the NFL level is new. There's a first time for it. Even if you're a very experienced kicker at the college level, kicking in a new stadium at the NFL level is new. And you have to go through the growing pains. So it's a stock that the 49ers invested in. And they felt they didn't pay a whole lot to get it. They paid a late 3rd round pick and a rookie contract, cheaper than Robbie Gould, who obviously would have commanded several $1,000,000. And they felt, okay, Gould would be a declining stock because he's on the wrong side of 40. We've already seen the field goal percentage drop. Let's get somebody that's young who's going to be a rising stock, who can give us kickoffs too. They went with Jake Moody. You don't abandon the stock after one day of dip, especially since it's shown great signs of growth in the weeks prior to that. So I don't think that Moody is a concern in the way that you write it here. Of course, he's a concern because the spotlight's going to be on him. The scrutiny is going to be on him. The microscope might be on him. But as far as unusual concern, no. He's going to be evaluated just like every other NFL player. If he performs, great. If he doesn't perform, you're going to move on to somebody else. But we don't have a big enough sample yet to determine whether or not he's performed. One game-winning kick opportunity is not enough to make this call one way or the other. NFL fans would be bad investors. Yes. And the 49ers might need that game-winning field goal in the playoffs, and they might get it in the playoffs from Jake Moody. Let's just wait and see how he does now. I'm not predicting anything. I'm just saying that the 49ers have chosen this course of action. So they have to follow through to at least a reasonable degree this course of action. Now, if Moody goes out and bombs the next game and then bombs the week after that against Cincinnati, of course they're going to be like, okay, this is panic time. We better make a move, call Robbie Gould, do whatever. But right now, we don't have enough data to make a smart decision if you're the 49ers. So you sit back, you let things play out. Patience is okay. You don't have to knee-jerk react to anything. Well, of course, Steve Young said that Purdy needs to run more when the opportunity presents itself. Steve Young was one of the greatest scrambling quarterbacks of all time. I will use that to say Brock Purdy is a really, really good athlete when it comes to his burst. I know I've mentioned this several times. It's worth mentioning again. Purdy's 10-yard split of his 40-yard dash was just 1/100th of a second slower than Lamar Jackson's. And I think we see it on the field a whole heck of a lot. I think we see Purdy able to escape in short areas really, really impressively. Go for Broke says practice does not make perfect. Only perfect practice makes perfect. And even that doesn't make perfect because perfection is a goal that cannot be reached, but you should always be striving to attain. It's like a limit, right? In math, I think the mathematicians watching here can help me. But you've got the axis of the graph, and then you have the limit that approaches it, kind of with a curve, but it never quite gets there. It gets closer and closer, but never quite gets there because perfection, actual total perfection in the sport of football would be unattainable. Kyle's playing 40 chess. He put Moody out there to give him a taste of a playoff atmosphere. I mean, I get it. You're joking, but yeah, in a way, this is kind of part of the 49ers plan. They're like, we have a rookie kicker. He's probably going to go through some growing pains. He might have a game-winning opportunity or two early in the season. He might miss one of those, but it's all going to be for the better, for the best of the team once the 49ers do get to the playoffs, because hopefully he's course corrected by then, right? Just like any player. They tried the same experiment with Trey Lance before he got hurt last year. They said, okay, you're not as good now as we hope that you're going to be later in the season. But you're going to start. We're going to let you make your mistakes while the rest of the team picks you up. Lance only made it to week 2 before he fractured his ankle, so we'll never know how exactly that would have gone. And then Brock Purdy showed up, and now the 49ers don't have to worry about how that would have gone because Purdy has made them forget. But this team has been willing to take on talented young players, throw them into the midst of a really talented roster that's going to get a lot of the good work done itself, and see how they can grow, see how they can develop. And I think that the idea with Jake Moody was similar in that way to the idea with Trey Lance. Now, Moody, let's be honest here, much more polished and better at what he does in college than Trey Lance, who was so inexperienced. So that's where it diverges. But you have two young players thrust into a good roster who have runway to develop. And that's where Jake Moody's at right now. And we'll see how it turns out for him. Every single one of these stories is different, but we can see the commonalities between them as well. That Cleveland game was a very good experience of Purdy. He will learn from this. I mean, I thought that the fact, the fact that the Gibson penalty happened might have been a slight blessing in disguise for the 49ers, because it allowed Brock Purdy to take the ball in that come from behind potential game-winning drive with 140 left against a historically good defense, at least so far. If the 49ers had just won that game with no drama, no penalty against Deshaun Gibson, Purdy doesn't get that kind of opportunity, and maybe that kind of opportunity is exactly what he is needed for growth, right? To take that next step of growth. Everybody was saying, well, I want to see Brock Purdy with a game on the line and adversity around him. Well, he had ultimate adversity. They had -5 net yards over the first 6 drives of the second half. I've talked about how good this Cleveland defense is, maybe the third best defense by at least one metric since 1970, right? Struggles galore, weapons out, Deebo Samuel hurt, Christian McCaffrey hurt, adversity. He's swimming in adversity, Brock Purdy was. So people that wanted Brock Purdy to have adversity, to face that and prove something, they got it in droves. They got exactly what they asked for. And then he answered. He drove him down the field while Myles Garrett was, Myles Garrett was on him in 1.9 seconds on one of the clips that I showed a little bit earlier. Trent Williams, speaking of diversity, you're playing this great defense without Deebo Samuel, without Christian McCaffrey, with your star left tackle working against a future Hall of Famer and Myles Garrett on a bum ankle. And Myles Garrett was running the hoop repeatedly around Trent Williams on that last drive, hitting Brock Purdy in 1.9 to 2 seconds, which is very quick. And Purdy was getting the ball off with accurate throws downfield. So Brock Purdy passed the adversity test. And that wouldn't have come, I think, probably not, right, if Deshaun Gibson had not been called for that penalty. So you could always look at a silver lining with things. It's only a regular season loss. Plenty more opportunities for the 49ers to rack up some big wins. Do I think Purdy can develop into a relationship like Montana and Walsh? I mean, Montana and Walsh didn't have the best relationship. Let's put that out there. Walsh thought about trading Joe Montana. Might even tried to trade him. Brought in Steve Young to push him. Tortured Steve Young and Joe Montana. So I don't know, what kind of, yeah, I'm not really sure if you're familiar with the darker sides of that relationship, but Walsh did get the best out of Montana. And I don't know if Kyle Shanahan and Bill Walsh operate in the same exact ways. I mean, Bill Walsh did some crazy stuff. If you talk to Steve Young and Joe Montana about it, I don't know if the modern NFL is conducive to some of those. Just there was a lot of, I think, kind of psychological warfare going on, right? With Bill Walsh and Joe Montana and Steve Young. Will there be a little bit of that? Well, it's just naturally competitive in the NFL. But I think what you mean is, can they be on the same page from a play calling and execution standpoint? And I think they already are. I talked about Kirk Cousins at the start of this show. And talking about Kirk Cousins at the start of this show, well, you realize that that's somebody who Kyle Shanahan has really yearned for as his quarterback. Shanahan himself said back in 2000, probably 19, he first acknowledged it, that the plan was to go get Kirk Cousins after the 2017 season when he was a free agent following the Washington tenure. Then Jimmy Garoppolo fell in their laps. The 49ers didn't go get Kirk Cousins. And now there's been renewed Kirk Cousins talk because he's going to be a free agent next year. But Brock Purdy has erased a lot of that talk, if not all of it, because of how well he's played. Shanahan is very particular about his quarterbacks. He wants things done in a certain way. So I think out of all the quarterbacks Shanahan has had in San Francisco, Brock Purdy executes down to a T more than anybody else. Jimmy Garoppolo was a good QB, but I think that Shanahan and Purdy on a more symbiotic page than Shanahan and Garoppolo ever were. That's the difference here, and I think that's what has erased a lot of that Shanahan Kirk Cousins talk. I mean, you could talk about Purdy and Montana. It's not, you're not equating them if you're talking about it. You should talk about Joe Montana because he's the standard bearer. He's the greatest of all time, right? You should talk about Steve Young, a Hall of Famer, because these guys played for the 49ers and you could draw from their history. Just because you talk about Brock Purdy and Joe Montana in the same sentence does not mean that you're saying that Brock Purdy is Joe Montana. But you can find useful context by invoking 49ers history. Here's some useful context for you. In 1989, November 15th, 1981, November 15th, 1981, the San Francisco 49ers lost to the Cleveland Browns at Candlestick Park 15-12. Joe Montana threw 2 interceptions. The 49ers did not score a touchdown, and Joe Montana was also committed intentional grounding in the end zone for a safety. They lost again, horrific performance for Joe Montana. 49ers lost to Cleveland 15-12. Guess what happened about 2 or 3 months later? The 49ers won the Super Bowl. Am I saying that Brock Purdy is Joe Montana? No, I'm saying something a little bit more nuanced than that. I'm saying that Joe Montana had a horrible game in a season in which he won the Super Bowl. And I can't say this for 100% certain because I need to go through the game logs of every quarterback to ever win a Super Bowl. But I'll go out on a limb and I'll guess that every single quarterback who has won a Super Bowl in the NFL throughout all of this league's history has had at least one bad game over the course of the season that preceded the championship. Football is not it's all go happy all the time kind of sport. No professional sport is. You're playing pros. But quarterback and especially in the NFL, you're going to go through the ups and the downs, and it's the aggregate which matters. And on the aggregate, Brock Purdy is still the most efficient quarterback in the National Football League right now. For those of you just joining, there he is. There's Kirk Cousins. Even though Cousins is number 2 in passing yardage, he's way down at 15 in efficiency because it's been a lot of garbage yardage for Kirk Cousins. Not a lot of garbage yardage for Brock Purdy. 200 dropbacks. Number 1 in EPA per play by a lot. And this is a good summary. He is looking better than most quarterbacks after these 6 games. We're going to go 49 minutes to celebrate 49,000. Those of you just joining, we have hit 49,000 subscribers. And this is a show about the 49ers. Maybe we get it up to 490 in the room late here on Wednesday night if you tell your friends about it here. We get 40 more over the next few minutes. But we're at what? 44 minutes? 44 minutes, 37 seconds, 49,000 subs. awesome, awesome stuff as we set the stage for Brock Purdy against Kirk Cousins. 49ers against the Vikings, the 2-4 Vikings against the 5-1 49ers. It's funny because some of the data indicates the Vikings have been the most unlucky team in the NFL, whereas last year they were the most overrated team in the NFL. They finished 13-4 last year. They were in a race with the 49ers for the number 2 seed, but they were number 28 DVOA. So the advanced stats at the Vikings is the 28th best team in football, 13-4. So they got a lot of wins they probably shouldn't have gotten last season. This season, it might be the opposite. The data suggests they've been the unluckiest team in football, and they're 2-4. They should have won a couple more games. One of the unlucky stats for the Vikings this year is they have they have 9 fumbles, which is the most fumbles in the National Football League. Fumbles typically when you'll fumble, yes, but losing 9 fumbles when I don't know how many they've had exactly, but they've lost 9 when nobody else has lost nearly that many. That usually indicates there's been some bad fortune on their side. So the 49ers hope that they don't progress to the mean when they play them this weekend or Monday night. You could compare Purdy to anybody. You can't equate him. I mean, I see a lot of this. You go, oh, you can't compare him to Joe Montana. You can't compare him to Tom Brady. Hell yes, I can compare him to whoever I want him to. Now, if I equate him, if I say that Brock Purdy is Joe Montana or Brock Purdy is Tom Brady, that's where it's ridiculous. But I could say, okay, wait, a lot of what he's doing right now reminds me of Tom Brady when he was young. A lot of what he's doing right now might have reminded me of Joe Montana when he was young. That's totally fair to say. Of course, you can compare. If you can't compare, if somebody's setting rules for comparing players, we might as well just pack it up and not have any of these discussions, right? So I think there's a big difference between comparison and equation. And I think that we really need to make sure that keep that in mind. Cal Bear likes Cousins. Stafford was Cousins before he won a Super Bowl. I think Cousins has played on some better teams than Matthew Stafford did in Detroit. And those Detroit teams rarely had a good defense to pair with what Matthew Stafford was bringing. He had Megatron, but he didn't really have a good defense. They didn't play good complementary football. Now, Minnesota has had some solid defenses here for Kirk Cousins. My issue with Kirk Cousins is that there has been a lot of garbage yardage here. Stafford had some efficiency in Detroit, but this year, this illustrates a lot of the problems that we've seen with Kirk Cousins. He's second in yardage, but he's 15th in EPA, which means that a lot of the yardage is not valuable yardage. And I still remember the final 4th down against the Giants in the playoffs last year was 3rd and long, and Cousins threw short of the sticks. You can't do that. This guy's 7-11 in prime time now. It seems that whenever the lights are brightest, he doesn't deliver at the biggest moments. And that's just what the numbers say. Again, the numbers right here, this year over the 2-4 start, you can see the efficiency hasn't been where it's needed to be. And then even in years where the efficiency has been better, those include the primetime games, and he's 7-11. They don't make deep playoff runs. They might win one playoff game under Kirk Cousins, but until he shows that little extra, that little moxie to be able to lead his team, he's at the most important position. I'm not going to lie right now. Jimmy Garoppolo showed it with the 49ers. They won some big playoff games with them under center. Until you get that from Kirk Cousins, it's going to be tough. Now, in the case of Matthew Stafford, I think we saw him go to the playoffs once with Detroit. So there really never was much of a sample because the team around him was bad enough. So I don't know if that's an apples and apples comparison. All right. Good stuff. We've gone 49 minutes. Thank you, everybody, for joining. 49,000. 49ers favored by 6.5 against the Vikings. Kyle Shanahan gets to oversee Brock Purdy against Kirk Cousins. And for anybody who's a football fan, that's fun stuff. Thanks to everybody for joining. Make sure you subscribe, and we'll talk to you very soon.